Coming on the Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome here into the Crowded Booth. Swarm Talk. We're talking Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets on a fine Thursday evening. I hope that you are having a fantastic week. We've done a lot of great content. We're going to continue to push out that content, including a bonus stream 5 minutes after this show concludes. We're going to do a lot of fun things tonight, but I want you to knock this out as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Get the video count up. Listen, you talk a lot about how Georgia Tech doesn't get enough attention. Well, here's a way for us to create that attention. You want to continue to talk, want to continue to do this, make bigger, better things. All you got to do, 2 easy things, completely free. It does nothing for you. It doesn't hurt you at all. All it does is you got to hit that like button. You got to hit that subscribe button, and we're going to continue to do some great content. Matt, you're right there. Matt's been with us all day, all week. Remember, we have that College Ball Revamp Dynasty bonus stream. Bowling Green tonight. Make sure you don't leave the YouTube channel. This stream is going to end. We're going to take about 5 minutes, and then we're going to play Bowling Green tonight. It's going to set up tomorrow, a date at Miami. We're kind of rocking and rolling through this season. It's going to be a lot of fun. Some ground rules for tonight. What is tonight's show about? Well, my name is Bryce Koon. This is Swarm Talk, a Georgia Tech-centered show here on the Crowded Booth YouTube channel. And what we want you to understand and what we want you to do is, look, we're going to kind of roll through some of these ideas that we've got down on paper. Ralph's got the script. Ralph's back there in the background. He's hanging out. He's having a fun time. And I think he's having a fun time. We're going to go best case scenario. We're going to go worst case scenario. And what would that look like? Not necessarily what the results would be. We're going to hold off on our prediction season. And then we're going to do something that, Ralph, we didn't prepare for, and we're going to have to go to commercial at some point because I've got to pull it up. But I will get that up indeed. We're going to have the Google Call voice chat. You're going to call into the show, and you're going to give your predictions. Maybe I shouldn't say predictions. What we need to get from you is we need to get your best case scenario. What does Georgia Tech in a perfect season for you look like? Obviously, I know someone's going to say 15-0, but what is the worst case scenario? I see David down there in the comments. I see you, Nancy. I see you, Lewis. Lewis saying, hi, Ralph. That's the most creative way I've ever seen Ralph spelled in my entire life, and I am pumped to be here. We're going to call these numbers. We're not going to accept calls, though, until we are after going what we're talking about. We're going to continue to do just that. Let's go. Let's rock and let's roll. My name is Bryce Koon. So what does the best case scenario look like for Georgia Tech in 2023? Now, look, obviously there's a lot of conversation happening around recruiting right now. And while that is encouraging, while that is something that you look at and you say, that's building for the future, we're talking about the now. Nobody in this 2024 class is going to be on campus for 2023. So that's great. That builds a lot of momentum. You've also got to keep some of those guys there, and you've got to continue to rock and roll with just that. So best case scenarios, let's kind of nail this down for the Jackets. We start on the offensive side of the football. On offensively, you have to, and this is the biggest thing, and I want to shout out a great friend of mine, a friend of the show. He's come on this show. You all berated him in the comments live, and his name's Palmer Toms. He's going to be publishing an article tomorrow on 3. I guess I can promote that. The On3 Georgia site. He's going to be promoting that. He talked with us, kind of a preview of what to expect from Georgia Tech. He's going to be publishing that article. We'll link it in the Discord if you haven't already. Make sure to do this. That will also follow us on social media. We'll be sharing that as well. But here's the biggest thing for me with Georgia Tech in 2023. Ever since the switch, the change, and we've talked about it ad nauseum all the time. We get it. We understand it. Ralph's going to cut my hands off if I don't stop playing with imaginary tennis balls somewhere up here. I'm going to sit on my hands. The major thing that has to happen for this season to be a success, PJ, we're going to get that link for you. The major thing that we have to do is we have to see this offense find an identity immediately. Find it, establish it nearly immediately is what's going to have to happen if you're going to see Georgia Tech have a best case scenario in 2023. That's why I've been very high on Buster Faulkner. That's why one thing he brings in is he brings identity. He brings a sense of business. That's something he was able to do during the short time he was the interim head coach. He brings in a guy that I think can do that, and that would be something that I think has to happen for a best case scenario to plan out. 8 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins, however you want to talk about it. If whatever you want to put the win column on to get to a bowl game or more, you have to establish that identity early on. Alongside that, and this kind of goes hand in hand, is QB1. What does QB1 look like at Georgia Tech? Now, obviously, there's been a lot of great comments, a lot of great conversation, not only on message boards, but obviously in our Discord as well, on our live shows talking about that. You've seen it play out in our revamped dynasty, is who's going to emerge? And I'm here to say that we're not going to get into positional previews. We're going to talk about some of the things. We'll have fall camp. We'll have, the first couple of games to analyze just that. But whoever it is, a quarterback one has to emerge for Georgia Tech to have success in 2023. Whether it's Haynes King coming over from Texas A&M, whether it's Zach Pyron or Zach Gibson. I know. But whoever it is, a QB1 has to emerge. Now, this is not to say that you can't have a situation where you have a lot of talented quarterbacks. I just sit in the camp, and I know it said a lot of different things. The best case scenario, you got to have a guy that can go out there and be a bona fide leader. You got to have a guy that can go out there and do that. Does Zach Pyron have those capabilities? Yes, we saw that down the stretch, especially in some tough losses, but also some tough wins. Does Haynes King have that mental approach? A lot of Georgia Tech fans haven't necessarily watched a lot of him. A&M fans were kind of sour on the program as a whole, but we're going to see what that looks like. That's kind of the second caveat, though, that goes hand in hand with what you want to see out of the offense having an identity. The third component of this, there's 5 components on each of these, if I can count correctly. Yes, 5 components on each of these, is the offensive line has to find a group of 5 that works. That is going to be, for me, obviously you talk about identity, obviously you talk about QB1. Those things have to happen. But if the offensive line can find a 5 that works together. And look, this has been one of the major criticisms of Brent Key during his tenure at Georgia Tech, is not having an offensive line that, one, obviously stayed healthy outside of his control, obviously, but being able to have a consistent 5. Now, we saw Jordan Williams slide into guard. That worked really well for Georgia Tech down the stretch last year. But if you find QB1, if you have an identity, which is a plan and a procedure of saying, this is our personnel, this is what we can go do as an offense, well, then obviously what you have to say is the offensive line's got to be there. So if the offensive line is not there, that's one of those cogs in the machine that would hold this team back from being a best case scenario in 2023. The offensive line's got a lot of options. They've got some guys returning. They've got some young guys that I could step up. We're going to go into those positional previews throughout the month of July and into early August. But offensive line has to find 5. Now, Ralph and I have talked about this before. You can't go into conference play and really any play with just 5 guys along the offensive front that can play. You got to have maybe a tackle that can play both sides, a swing tackle. You got to have guards that can be interchangeable. And really, you've got to have a guy that can snap the ball in case something happens to your starting center. So maybe, and Ralph can nod his head in approval back there and behind the stage, I would feel comfortable as, yes, if you had 5 starting caliber guys getting there, you got to still have maybe 7 or 8. Maybe 2 or 3 more guys that you could throw into a game and feel comfortable that the drop-off level of play is not there. We haven't seen that since kind of the rebrand. We'll talk about Georgia Tech, obviously. That's been continuing to be talked about. But that's the third thing. Now I'm going to flip it over to the defensive side of the football, where I will say there's much less concern for me than the offensive side of the football, as many people do. But best case scenario, what would that look like? Well, first off, remember, you had a guy drafted, and he was drafted, Keon White, fairly high when you talk about Georgia Tech football players being drafted over the past 5 to 7 years. Keon White being drafted, in order for this team to have a best-case scenario, you have to, 1, minimize the effect of the loss of him. So Keon White's gone. Where do you find your pass rush? Now, we can obviously talk about a bunch of different guys. We're going to talk about it in the next segment. But you have to minimize that, and having a front 7 that can get after the quarterback, can continue to get after what I would say is, a attitude of just dominance. They have to continue that. Keon White was nasty. He was a nasty guy up front. It would be very interesting to see how, in my opinion, what this defensive front's going to look like week 1 against Louisville. But they're going to have to establish it early on. Now, obviously, getting out in front of the 8-ball is a common theme of all the topics we're talking about, and you're going to see as well, worst case is things don't happen. That's kind of how this works. But best case scenario, if the defense, the front 7, does not feel the effects of Keon White moving on to the NFL, That's one of the things that you can pencil in, one of those cogs in the big machine of what could look like a best case scenario for Georgia Tech. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. And it leads me to the back end of the defense. You've got obviously questions maybe up front that you've got to see. You've obviously got some things too in the middle where you've got some transfer linebackers. We're going to talk about those as well. But in order for this to really take a step up, if the secondary gets all-American type play, and yes, I'm looking and talking to you, the guy who is featured on the front and on the thumbnail of this video, and Lamiles Brooks, if you get all-American play out of Lamiles Brooks as a quarterback, as a captain of the defense on the back end, if you get Clayton Powell-Lee taking, not a sophomore slump, but a step in the right direction as a sophomore, Jalen King coming back, being a physical presence in the run game, you get a guy like Spider Sims to elevate his play, whether it's Kennan Johnson, whether it's Kenyatta Watson II, whether it's Amari Harvey, Omar Daniels, any of these guys. If you can get all-American play by Lamiles Brooks and then you get all ACC play in that secondary, one, it helps a lot with the concern of Keon White being gone. But another thing that it can do is it also can elevate and give confidence to your front seven, knowing that you've got guys that can cover for a decent bit back there. Lamiles Brooks, you continue to look around, and I don't think a lot of people give him the national attention that he necessarily deserves, in the sense of this is a guy who's returning as one of the top safeties, not just in the ACC, not just regionally, but he's a guy who is returning, in my opinion, as one of the top safeties in the country, the way he's played. Matt Brook, appreciate the donation there. Thanks for locking in. But out of best case scenarios, you got to have those 5 things, and we're going to run right back through it here. Offense finds identity immediately. You're able to find the identity and immediately implement that in the game against Louisville. QB1 emerges in game 1. You have to have that. There's no doubt about it. Look, you don't want to be rocking and rolling in 4th, 5th game. This program has seen way too much of that, of this topsy-turvy quarterback conversation, especially last year when 4 guys started. It was just wild. Offensive line, you got to find a 5 that works in the starting capability, but you've also got to find, in my opinion, 2 or 3 more guys that can continue to get that. Defense doesn't feel the effects of Keon White, and the secondary gets all-American play. So that is going to be the best case scenario. Now, what does that look like results-wise? Well, I teased you because we're not going to do our predictions until at the end, and we're going to hear from you. Remember, we're opening those call lines exactly when we get done with this part in this next segment. What does the worst case scenario look like for Georgia Tech? And that's going to be something that I think is going to be something very interesting to look at, because a lot of people, when we talk worst case scenario, and fans, not just Georgia Tech fans, but fans everywhere, will turn around and say, well, that's just you. You're just kind of crapping on the program. You're just trying to say the program's not good. No, it's about being realistic and giving both ends of the spectrum. Odds are you're not going to end up here. Odds are you're not going to end up here. You're going to probably fall somewhere in the middle. I believe that it was, I don't remember who this was, and this is a quote that kind of goes around coaching circles a lot. You're never as good as you think you are, but you're never as bad as you think you are. So if you don't check off every single box of those 5 for best case scenarios, you might have to win a national title. But if you check off 3 of the 5, 4 of the 5, you feel good about yourself. Where you don't want to be checking is 4 of the 5 of the next we're going to. Worst case scenario for Georgia Tech here in 2023. We're going to start offensively here. No QB emerges. This is an interesting topic of conversation because if a quarterback doesn't emerge in 2023, you're really left with a handful of guys that have some promise but haven't delivered on it. What would that look like? Well, the first one is you went in the transfer portal and got a guy that was highly touted out of high school, didn't work where he was, but what you're chalking it up to, and this is what I'm chalking it up to, is a situation, an environment that was not right for player development. Texas A&M, they might get it together this year. They might get it together the next year with or without Jimbo Fisher. But what I think that you can say is, and honestly tell yourself is, that was not the best situation for do that. So worst case scenario is you don't have a quarterback that emerges as a true number 1. Not just no quarterback, a quarterback that does not emerge as a true number 1. You still have inconsistent topsy-turvy play. That also would see in a guy in Zach Pyron, who obviously was an emotional leader, did a fantastic job willing this team to win. But you kind of figure out in year 2, and this still may happen, and I don't know if it's necessarily worst case, and so I want to be careful how I phrase this. But in Pyron's sense, you have a guy that shows some promise, but he still needs more time. A lot of people are ready to hand the reins over to him because of the emotional attachment, the emotional connection of what happened to last year. And I'm not pumping the brakes on saying that he shouldn't be the starter. If he wins the job, he should. But here's what I am saying. The guy's a winner. He's won at every level he's been at, and that's admirable. But when he struggles in 2023, because he's not going to be perfect, and I hope someone clips this, records this, the kid wins the Heisman. That'd be a best case scenario for everybody. But if he shows that he needs more time and plays topsy-turvy, you can't have a quick trigger and pull him out. So what would it look like to not have a QB1 solidify that? Worst case scenario would be either an injury to someone, King still hasn't fixed some of the mechanics, or Pyron shows that while it was an emotional roller coaster and he took, care of it, he was able to do some positive things. What turns out what he wasn't ready for kind of that moment in the sense of being the everyday guy without the emotions. That's something that's going to be really key in this season. We talked about, obviously, offensive line, and this kind of goes into the second part of this worst-case scenario. The offensive line has too many injuries, and they cannot find even a starting five. We've seen this story play out in front of our eyes over the past 3, 4, 5 years, it feels like at this point. When you don't have key offensive linemen that can step up into roles, it hurts you when you do have injuries. So for Brent Key to be able to find that combination is going to be huge. If you do not find that, it won't matter who QB1 is. It won't matter how many touches you give Dante Smith, who I think is poised for a big year. It won't matter about this revamped receiver room that some folks say has no talent, zero talent, people have been quoted as saying, but that has talent and is bringing it into Atlanta. And guys that are returning incumbent that I don't think we're paying too much attention. And yeah, we're looking at you, DJ Moore. If the offensive line is not up to par, if they have injuries, which is a part of the game, but you don't have sufficient depth behind them, that's going to be a big issue. It's going to be a serious big issue, and it's going to really be one of those stories that we continue to see play out. And what's the difference from this year to last year to last year? That's a worst case scenario. We go back over to the defensive side of the football, and I've got 3 more here for you. The offensive line we talked about that. The loss of Keon is too much. Keon White was a great pass rusher, obviously transferred in. He really flourished in his role in 2022. Worst case scenario is guys like Daquan Dowse, guys like Zeke Biggers, who could take a step up. You lose a Kilo Stone in the transfer portal. So the guys that left hurt you, whether it's portal or that, and you can't account for that loss. Now, look, they brought in a lot of names. It's going to be interesting to see kind of how that fixates and moves forward with what you're wanting to do along the defensive front. That front seven has got to be better. So how do you do just that? We're going to talk about position previews later on this month, but that's a worst case scenario. If that's too much to overcome one player, then one, you're not as deep as you thought you were essentially at that position. And you also really don't have the necessary roster construction that you thought you did in the first place. So you're not deep enough, and you really didn't plan for what this could happen, what this could look like, and guys just don't develop. That would be a worst case scenario. We stay on the defense and we look at the linebacker transfers. Obviously, both of those guys, I really like the way that they play in Braylon Oliver and Andre White. I like the way they play in my College Bowl Revamp Dynasty. That's at least that. But you're replacing the production of Charlie Thomas and Ace Ely, and 2 guys that I think in Ace Ely, you had a bona fide leader. You had a guy that knew how to lead a defense, and Charlie Thomas, although undersized for the position, was a bona fide playmaker. And really, at times, you could say, kept Georgia Tech in the thick of things in certain games. So that's going to be something for me that I'm going to have to see with my own eyes. If these 2 guys don't, step up into those roles, if they can't provide the leadership, if they can't produce, that's a worst case scenario, because you really have lost a lot of snaps at the linebacker position in those situations. Now you have Trinius Tatum, you have guys, behind those guys that you could look at, but you brought these guys in for a reason because you thought they could start for you day one. If that doesn't happen, that could be a worst case scenario. And the last one, obviously, is injuries to key defensive players. Guys we mentioned about that back in the secondary. A guy like Clayton Powell-Lee, a guy like LaMiles Brooks, Spider Sims, different players, Zeke Biggers, a guy in, Sylvain Yonjuan. These guys that are going to make big plays, Kyle Kennard, and be pivotal pieces of what you hope is to be in a roster that can get you to a bowl game. The injury bug could bite. That's a worst case scenario, and it's something we've seen in certain seasons. You go back to the Coach Paul Johnson era. You had seasons where the injury bug just bit, and you couldn't do anything about that. It happens in different programs. That's a worst case scenario as well. So we go through the best case scenario, we go through the worst case scenario, and now we're going to kind of open up these phone lines. And Ralph, I'll go ahead and throw this up here. If you want to call in, we got the Section 103 hotline. You can do just that. We're going to make sure we share this screen, and this should be interesting. Call in if you must. Talk to us about what you have going on. And we're going to talk to you kind of about what you think your best case scenarios and your worst case scenarios might be, Matt, with that comment of 2015. Until we do that, until we get our first caller, Ralph, let's go ahead and walk through some of these comments that we have here so far. You can call into that Section 103 hotline. That is 706-940-2315. Let's go through some of the comments that we had. I know you got some starred. Ralph's got about 20 of them, and we'll walk through that. Does that mean Ralph is my stepdad? That's hilarious. David here. The best case scenario is Tech is 8-4. Ole Miss, Clemson, and Georgia will be too much for these teams to handle. Week 8 and 9, home versus UNC, and Virginia will be a tough stretch. Look, you could see something. I don't know. You could see something along that. Do not try and call this number while the stream is off. I will block the number and send you the depths of the Pacific Sea. Hey, we completely understand. I understand. You can go ahead and call that number right there, 706-940-2315 if you like. John Burns. J-Bat may become our athletic department's best asset. I think that's a fair assumption with the way things are going. That would be a best case scenario for the program as a whole. Continuing going down that list, David will be that. We're going to go ahead. I need you to tell me where you're from.
Yep.
How you doing? And let's talk. Who are we talking to?
This is Dr. Bob coming to you from Durham, North Carolina.
Well, Dr. Bob, talk to us. What is your best case and potentially worst case, or what do you have to say here on the phone lines today?
I just want to see some good offensive line play. We've been pretty terrible in recent years, which is disappointing. You know, the kind of elephant in the room is, was this due to the offensive line coach who's now the head coach? I don't think that's the case. I think there were some issues higher up in the program, as we all saw, and we saw how the end of the season played out. I like Coach Key. I like what he's doing in recruiting. He's a Tech man. I am a Georgia Tech alumnus, so I'm very proud of our program. I think we have some potential under Coach Key. But in order for all of the skill position players, the wide receivers we brought in, Zach Pyron, Haynes King, whoever it is, they have to have time to throw the football. We just have not had a consistently strong performance for an entire season out of the offensive line. So I'm looking for development, along our offensive line. Not expecting them to be world beaters, but just, an average to slightly above average offensive line. And I think we can go 7-5. And if we get a favorable bowl matchup, then maybe we can get to 8-5. I think the absolute worst case scenario is if the bottom completely falls out, we have 2 guaranteed wins, knock on wood, with Bowling Green and South Carolina State. But, being up here in Durham, I've have another affiliation with a certain ACC school right here, and seeing what they have done in just a couple of years with their new head coach and Mike Elko, there's no reason that Tech cannot be at the same level to a little bit better than the team up here in Durham within the next few years. So I want to see good offensive line play. I want to see consistent offensive line play across the course of the season. And if we can do that, I think we can get back to a bowl game. And then hopefully that'll be a springboard for coming seasons.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you summed it up pretty well right there with talking about the best case and worst case scenario. And I'll ask you this, Doc, when you look at this offensive line, look, they returned some guys from last year. Obviously, guys like Pierce Quick no longer with the program. what is the confidence level? I'll say this because that's a conversation that we've been having, on this show. We've been talking with a lot of other different people about it. Like your confidence level with Key being elevated to head coach, you have Jeep Wade, who seemingly is, people are responding well to on the recruiting front. But from a development standpoint, I mean, you have a guy in Jordan Williams that was starting as a true freshman. And now, multiple years in the program, and he's going to be, look, we're going to get the cookie cutter interviews, but how confident do you feel in that offense line being able to kind of prove what you said and what they have to do?
Well, I'd like to see Weston Franklin hustle at center some more than he did in the Clemson game last year. Now, I know that was kind of a viral moment where he, may not have looked his best. You got guys like K-Rob who played over there at left tackle last year. I also have a little bit of inside knowledge with Jeep Wade because I have an affiliation with a private school down in New Orleans as well. That I think you were hoping to make it out for their game against Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
And in his 1 year there under Willie Fritz, the offensive line did not play up to the level that Fritz's offensive lines have played at. Now, you could say maybe that was due to the hurricane and some other unforeseen circumstances. Wade did have some success up here at App State. I think it remains to be seen. I do like the hire of Buster Faulkner. I think you got to have good play calling and, given, injuries, which will be inevitable, how does he adjust his play calling to the strengths of the offense? And does he have to adjust with the offensive line potentially being a liability? I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm at about a 4 right now with the offensive line. It's not abysmal. We're not in the cellar anymore, but they got to show me something. I'm looking for us, like they did against North Carolina, running the football. But you can't just rely on just running the football the whole year. We're going to have to give the quarterback some time to be able to find some receivers down the field in order to run the kind of offense that Buster wants to run.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate it, Dr. Bob, man. You stay safe up there in Durham, and we thanks so much for calling in.
Yeah, thanks so much. Take care.
That's Dr. Bob up there in Durham, North Carolina. And look, he hit on a good point. And once again, those phone lines are still open. Section 103 hotline 706-940-2315. I want to hear your thoughts on this, and I want you to call in and tell us or comment below. We'd appreciate the calls. It's kind of fun to hear you all talk, and I can take a break from talking. But, who do you think should start a quarterback? We can just open that up if you'd like. We're going to take a couple more calls there as we get to kind of get close to wrapping up this show. We can continue to go through those comments that we went through earlier. I know we were looking right there. GT Bowhunter, Paul Johnson said it's never as good or as bad as it seems. It's very true. We got another caller on the line. Hello, and how are you doing? And state where you're from and what's your name.
Hey, what's up, brother Bryce? This is PJ. I'm live from Atlanta.
All right, PJ, how you doing, my man? We're going to get you that Discord link. You can join the conversation. But what did you want to talk about today?
What you just asked about the starting quarterback, Hayes King or Zach Tyrone. I personally believe that, of course, the best players should play.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do a lot of. It's not a lot of film on Hayes King as far as like YouTube stuff. Like he played against our former quarterback that plays for is it Campbell or not Campbell one school on YouTube. Yeah, it was pretty okay. It's an FCS school. LCS school. But Pyron is from the Virginia Tech game. He looked amazing, And so some things you can see it. Some things you can't believe he was a freshman. So I guess I just want to say it all starts with the O-line. But I want to see the best player win the position. That's pretty much it.
And I ask you this, PJ, when you talk about the quarterback position, look, I hope fans understand when I say, look, it was really nice to see the fight and the grit that Zach Pyron played with. And it's easy to see why Brent Key, who was his main recruiter during that process, to get him out of Pinson Valley, right out there, right outside of Birmingham. When you see that, you fall in love with it. But my thing is you just came from an era where you were falling in love. You had a guy that was falling in love with one guy, and to me, that's dangerous. No matter how good it makes you feel. I hope the fan base can understand that.
No, I definitely agree with you. And that's why I was saying, he played good that one game, but personally, it might be an unpopular opinion. At the spring game, I thought Hayes King played better, but that's just a little snippet of what we said. I personally think Hayes King should start, but that's just my own personal opinion. And we had a conversation at work with a couple of Bulldog fans, I guess, and they were saying about, SEC has better competition, blah, 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 blah. Hayes King should start for y'all. SEC does have better competition. It's a no-brainer. But I guess, because I know, like, you on the inside, so you actually can see kind of things like that. But for us fans, we can just go by what we see or, like, when it's time to go. I just hope and pray that it's the best player, let the best man win.
Well, and look, we've talked about it a lot on this show. I think we can all say now, obviously, that wasn't the case over the past 4 years, that we all saw at different positions. And so if that's truly, if competition is king is not just a slogan on a t-shirt anymore, and I think they threw those t-shirts out, but I'll tell you this, if that indeed is what's happening, look, it doesn't matter to me. And to me, look, you can love Zach Pyron, you can love Haynes King, but I'll tell you what, the entire fan base can be united on is winning. And that will unite everybody regardless who plays. PJ, I appreciate you calling in, my man. And we're going to get you. I saw your DM on Twitter. I'm going to get you that link for that Discord.
Yes, sir. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me, man.
That's PJ live from Atlanta. We got some more callers coming in. Keep on rolling. We're going to continue to talk here. Once again, a bonus stream right after this. It's going to be College Football Revamp Dynasty. We're going live, and it'll be a little more casual. It's going to be a lot more fun. We can talk Georgia Tech football, but you got to let me beat Bowling Green before that big matchup against Miami. I thought PJ brought up a great conversation, and you could do a whole show on it in the sense of, can you get quality offensive line play? And it's kind of the theme again. We got what's your name and where are you from? We got what's your name?
Hello?
Yes, what's your name and where are you from?
Hey, this is Nico. I'm from Sandy Springs, Conference Sandy Springs.
Awesome. Well, talk to us. What do you want to ask today, or what do you want to talk about?
I just want to hit on your best case, worst case. I think I'm going to go a little bit off, related to football, but kind of on that business side and the leadership route. I think best case, Thacker confirms and proves that he was a wise keep on staff. That'll be interesting to see. And then J Bat certifies himself as another good hire with the fundraising and getting the hype build up and seeing what happens there, as well as none to minimal of these 2024 recruits flipping by the time signing period rolls around, I think in December, right? And then 8-4, 7-5 best case record. Worst case, the big one, the question mark that everyone seems to be bringing up is both lines playing poorly, and a fourth straight 3-9 season. So,
yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I like what you said about Thacker, and that's something I didn't bring up, and that's a great point made. I mean, look, it's a guy who a lot of people were wondering kind of during the offseason, was it a guy they were going to keep? What did they think? And look, ever since the old head coach kind of, I will say, got out of the way, I think that Thacker showed why I think he was hired in the first place. Like, that's just kind of where I saw. Now, how does it continue? How do you get consistency? And that's that was my whole conversation. People wanted to talk, people wanted to blast and say, oh, you didn't want Brent Key as head coach, or you didn't want these certain things. No, I'm more concerned about the longevity of the program than I am a flash in the pan, but I understand the emotional attachment to it. But the good thing is, I'll say, if it is not what needs to happen, if Thacker isn't, you could definitely see this team. Let's say they go, 6-6, 7-5, or it's 5-7. God forbid 4-8 or anything below that. Brent Key did not bring in Andrew Thacker, so that that's not his guy. That's not Jay Bat's guy. That's none of these guys' guy. They could let him go. But I do appreciate the comment, and obviously, it's great having you guys on, and we appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, thanks for taking the call. Appreciate it.
A great point. Great point there with Andrew Thacker. I think it's fantastic, and it's a good point to talk about. as well as you continue to do just that. A couple more calls, maybe one or two. If you have the time, make sure to call in. We want to hear from you. If not, we're going to get ready to wrap up here and kind of going through that. Amit Tagger, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Best case, we are bowl-bound, top 20 recruiting class next year. And then, obviously, below that, worst case is that Brent Key is an O-line coach at Georgia in 2 years, and Jay Batt is their NIL coordinator. Well, I will say this. That is definitely a worst-case scenario if your head coach in the next 2 years is the offensive line coach at your arch rival, and if your athletic director is somehow the NIL coordinator for the football program at your arch rival in the span of 2 football seasons. That would definitely be a bad case scenario. This is Swarm Talk. Bryce Koon talking a little bit of Georgia Tech worst case scenarios. We appreciate Doc Bobby over there calling, Vince in the chat, Matt in the chat, PJ gave us the call. PJ, I loved your comment right here. You mentioned it on your phone call. The O-line must improve. Randy Carson, appreciate you tuning in tonight. No QB, hard to imagine that with the room that we have. And I agree. I agree, but we're talking about worst case scenarios. We're talking about wheels fall off the bus, and that's what you don't want to happen. You don't want to see that happen. We're approaching 8:10 on that clock, which means we're getting ready to wrap it up here. We told you, bonus stream, that we're going to be talking, and we're going to be playing, actually, talking some more football, talking and hanging out, the College Ball Revamp Dynasty, Georgia Tech Bowling Green. We're 2-2. We can go to 3-2 and get a big, we'll call it a streak, a 2-game winning streak heading in to that game Miami that we'll play tomorrow afternoon. Ralph, appreciate you so much for doing the work back there. There's Ralph with the Troy Trojans flag back there. We appreciate everyone for tuning in. My name is Bryce Koon. We've appreciated you talking on the Section 103 hotline, our big sponsors. You got to check out what they have going on over there as well. For the final time, to this week at least, we're going to be live, kind of the schedule of things. What's going to happen? We'll be live next Thursday, but we're going to have some downtime. I'm going to have a couple of interviews, recruiting interviews coming on the channel. Make sure you subscribe, set up those notifications so you know when we go live or when we post some new content that you need to be doing. And once again, like the video, hit that like button. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so we can get you on the show as well. My name is Bryce Koon. We thank you so much. For Ralph Leary, we've had a lot of fun talking here on a Thursday night. We appreciate your time. Appreciate what you've been doing as well, supporting the channel, supporting all the aspects, and make sure to join that Discord. PJ, we're going to get that link for you. We'll catch you next time.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The crowded booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.